Tom, an alcoholic, and a member of the Primary Purpose. Can I bend this mic? Okay. I'm a member of the Primary Purpose group in Southern Pines, North Carolina, and delighted to be here. I really appreciate you guys putting this on, and folks showing up for something that's pretty well content oriented. Sometimes if you mention anything with work in the title, that'll thin the crowd, because work scares people off. And so I am really pleased to see this gathering this morning. I don't know what my topic is, but I know what I'm going to talk about. I think it's connected to the title, something about the depth of the illness, and so I want to get into that ballpark. And sure, any brand new people here that within, say, the first 3 months of sobriety? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, yeah, good show. It may be some deeper water than you comfortably paddle in, but it's water that you're very definitely in, so it's not irrelevant at all. Well, I've been watching the parade into Alcoholics Anonymous for a long time. I started in AA in February 2nd of '57, and you imagine how many folks I've watched go through here. And over the years, I've become more and more concerned about the level of effectiveness in the program. Effectiveness in terms of people coming in and genuinely finding recovery and being able to hang on to it. And it seems that our effectiveness has declined over the years rather than improved. That practice doesn't seem to have made a lot of difference with us. And it's very, very, it provokes a lot of concern with me when I watch people come in with their lives broken and pretty barren of hope, and then start to get to hope and then come to a point where you just sort of drift off for whatever reason. And also see a lot of people who stay in the program but sort of die in place. They just sort of lose the steam, lose the spirit. And so what I want to try to deal with a bit today, I got 1 hour, is that right? Okay. Well, I got a 3-hour topic, and it's okay. I'll have to pack it in, and I'll have to talk like a Yankee almost to get it in, but we get in much as we can. When I would frame it a little bit. I don't usually read to folk, but I want to say, if you've got computers and you get email, you probably just like me, you get just overloaded with stuff. A lot of it is just, God, you wish you hadn't even gotten it. It's just goofy stuff. But once in a while, you get a real nugget. And somebody sent me this. I don't even know who I got a name of it, but I don't know the person. And it's called "We Don't Have to Drink to Die," and it sort of captures in a way I'd never quite heard it phrased this way, of what happens to people when you come in. You got in this case we'll be talking about two different trajectories. You got people like me who've never looked back and who have really thrived in Alcoholics Anonymous, who have genuinely found a new life and have gotten caught up in it, and bless you, in a very real kind of way. You got other people that come in and they get off to a pretty good start, and then they just kind of level off into some sort of a survival mode. And the thing about AA, we don't have a pass-fail system. Our failures you usually find in a bar, so we don't have any kind of way of grading people and all that kind of stuff. In this program, we've got a program to work, but we're free to stop at whatever point we're willing to settle for. And many people come to AA and they're willing to settle for just survival, for just not drinking. For my money, just not drinking is about as miserable as what happens when drinking. And being miserable sober is not a real pleasant thing. And so an awful lot of things happen. A lot of suicides occur. As a matter of fact, nobody's ever done real statistics on it, but the common belief is that there are more suicides in early recovery or in after recovery than in active alcoholism. And when you think about the nature of the illness, and you start to get acquainted with the nature of the illness, you can see why. And why, for my money, that settling for something less than the very best is dangerous and not very satisfying. So here's the thing I got. It's just an account of somebody who lost a dear friend, because we don't have to drink to die. We buried him yesterday. The county coroner had published the required notices for next of kin, and nobody had claimed his body. It was just his sponsor and I, no preacher even. The county doesn't pay for those. Not much of a send-off, and not the one David had asked for. A cheap coffin, a backhoe dug a hole, and that was it. And another old AA gone. He had been sober, and I don't agree with everything in this, but I agree with 99% of it. He had been sober over 20 years and in AA over 30. That's the sort of a study in contradiction. Anyway, his point's well made, I think. A stern and rigid man who tried to soften his edges and never could. He was a loner, a fringer, and an isolated man at the edge of life's good things. He hung in there, and in the end, hung himself. I don't know why. I can't know. I know there had been somebody got some glasses. Well, everybody's got glasses, but I mean, you got the dime store glasses, David? You ought to be the old person that had a... Thank you, buddy. God, you need a dog, David. The bad news is they fit. Yeah, okay. I left mine in the car. Yeah, I'll start that over again because I'm having trouble seeing. He'd been sober 20 years and in the age 30. Rigid man who tried to soften his edges never could. He was a loner, a fringer, and an isolated man at the edge of life's good things. He hung in there and in the end hung himself. I don't know why. I can't know. I know there had been a diagnosis of senile dementia, and I know that the doctor had added cancer to the list, but I've seen AAs deal with such things before. I don't know why David decided he couldn't. It isn't the first time I've been through this in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've known several over the years who just up and walked out life's door one day. Sober, but we're not happy. Sober, but we're not at peace. Sober, but they died of alcoholism. Our disease doesn't need us to drink in order to kill us. I wish more folks knew that and appreciated it. Alcoholism is the only disease that is entirely capable of fighting back. Alcoholism can take care of itself and emerge in new places and new forms when it isn't properly treated. That's because of the spiritual malady. Most people think it has something to do with prayer, with God. It doesn't. It has to do with our spirit, that force which animates, motivates, and propels us. As an alcoholic, my spirit is ill. It is flawed. My character or basic nature doesn't work right. At its root, it is a fundamental and irreversible insecurity, a hole that can't ever be filled. It is an instinct run rampant, a desperate need for acceptance and love that cannot be met. It hurts. It fills one with fear. The selfishness and self-centeredness of the alcoholic lives here. We're totally preoccupied with what's going on with ourselves on the inside. The slings and arrows of experience, warped by this need drive us to the fringe. And the voices of the committee in our head keep us there. We're obsessed with ourselves. And from this condition of mind, the insanity of feelings gone haywire, we become self-medicators eventually. We discover alcohol or something else, and the stuff quiets the voices, provides a relief we've never been able to find in any other way. It isn't any wonder that we drink the way we do. Some of us, in attempting to meet these crying demands of our spirit, become ill. we develop other malformations of behavior and suffer in 100 different ways. God broke David's obsession to drink, but I don't think David ever truly understood his disease. I say that because I watched him struggle with those old, unresolved issues of his heart for years. His rigidity, coldness, aloofness, and isolation and difficulty with other people were a reflection of the pain in his heart, of the disease of alcoholism gone deep inside and still active. Alcoholism didn't need David to drink in order to continue to try to kill him. And in the end, it succeeded. In the end, instead of self-abandon, David abandoned hope and discovered a bitter end. Our recovery from alcoholism through the steps must be a threefold process. It is not one-dimensional. When we say as in AA that we have a triangle, recovery, unity, service, we mean it. In working the steps, I clear a pathway for two purposes. First, to come into a group of human people and away from the fringe of society where I've spent most of my emotional life. Secondly, I discover belonging through service to people within the group. It is only this entire threefold process that heals. It is especially true for those of us who suffer from the spiritual malady to a great degree. Perhaps the 12th step says it best. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, that's recovery. We try to carry this message to other alcoholics, that's service, and practice these principles in all our affairs, such as unity. You see, I cannot hold back. I must not continue to suffer that shyness, aloneness, that overwhelming sense of guilt, of self in my affairs. I must get involved in a group of people to practice these principles in all my affairs. Only the total approach is healing. Anything less is little more than driving my disease deep, and if I do that, it will continue to eat away, trying to destroy me. On the plus side, it wasn't his fault. He seemed to have been born that way. There were a lot of ideas about self that David could never muster the willingness to let go of. He is at rest now. But it says somewhere that no matter how far down the scale we've gone, we'll see how our experience can help benefit others. David cannot speak to his experience any longer. I'm speaking to his memory. And I think that if David could talk to us today, he'd say work the complete program of recovery. And I share that that's a lengthy reading, and I don't normally read, but that I think there's a real story in that. And let me make it a little bit more personal in terms of, now I've never experienced what David did, and neither did he before, but that was the end of the road for him. I was, 2 days ago, I was at a memorial for a fellow that I had sponsored in AA for a number of years, and he's one fellow that I don't use the word firing in relation to sponsorship. Yes, how do you fire somebody from a spiritual relationship? I mean, that just never seemed to a congruent way of describing that. So, but he's one. I gave him a year's notice and told him that at the end of a year, that I was just at 9 years, I had seen no visible signs of improvement. I mean, none. He was just as bummy as he was the day he walked in. And I said, continue to pretend to sponsor you is a delusion. I mean, my God, all I'm doing is enabling you. So I said, I'm going to give you a year because I don't think you're going to find a sponsor real easy. And so I got a year. About 10 months later, he said, you really mean that about not sponsoring me, don't you? I said, yeah, I sure do. And he still didn't, and so we parted company. We didn't part friendship. We parted company. I'm not going to pretend to sponsor somebody, and make a charade out of that. And he became sort of an infrequent visitor today. He liked to come in and pick up a medallion once in a while, but anything but a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He was willing. He stopped at what he was willing to settle for, and what he was willing to settle for was not much, and so he lived the life of sort of a junk-surrounded hermit, and it wasn't a photo. You wouldn't want him as a poster boy for Alcoholics Anonymous, but that's who he was, and he's like David. He was somebody that got into his own world, and then he died. And at the memorial, we just had a little quick thing, had it at a halfway house, which was the last meaningful place in his life that was identifiable. And so that's where the memorial was at a halfway house. And we met in a little conference room, and it was more than adequate because we only had 12 people at the memorial. And I was the only AA member at the memorial. And my wife sort of exclaimed in dismay at that. She said, "My God, why didn't more people from AA come to the funeral, to the memorial?" I said, "Well, the main reason is because they didn't know him. Who's you going to come to a memorial for somebody you don't even know? It's not a stranger." But that's what happens, when somebody drops off the radar screen. And it was a sad thing, and during the course of the memorial, they asked me to use 2 words to describe him. And the words came fairly easily. And I said he is charming and challenging. and that is exactly the description of him. He could absolutely con you out of your shoes. But he was a pure loser in the process and a challenge to work with. Anyway, I've seen this up close. I had another good friend who was a fellow. I won't go into a whole bunch of detail about it, but he was a guy that I ate with quite a lot. He came into the program, and unfortunately, we'll sometimes make a bad mistake. And just because somebody has a lot of resources, that means we think they have a lot of ability. And that we'll tend to overrate them and fast-track them into stuff they're not ready to handle. That happened with him. This was a guy that had mega bucks, and he came in. And in the zeal to sort of make him feel comfortable here, he started getting propelled into service beyond his capability. He was state chair in no time. He was a delegate to a conference, and when he was 12 years sober, he got drunk. And I watched that man. I've watched many men and women lose their recovery and try to get it back. And I'll tell you, that has got to be one of the most taxing, trying, vexing experiences that a man can offer. I never understood for a long, long time. In fact, this guy that I'm talking about, the Deep Pockets guy, helped me to clarify my understanding of why people have so much trouble coming back to AA who have left, who've gotten drunk and want to come back. And a guy, those of you who've been around recognize the name William James. He was an author and a philosopher, theologian. He was a guy that Bill read extensively. He wrote complex books. I started to read one, but it gave me a headache, and so I just quit. And so I let Bill do that reading. But James said something one time that in one sentence, almost one sentence, put total clarity for me on why people have so much trouble coming back. And the man I'm talking about was a good example. And what James said was simply this: no state of mind, once attained and lost, can ever be regained and be the same. And I've seen so many people beat their brains out trying to come back to AA and recapture what they had. And they never will. It's like trying to have another first honeymoon or another first kiss. I mean, that's one time per lifetime. You may have many of either, but you'll never have the first one again. And so people who lose their recovery come back to us. And I always tell them, I tell them, you just be prepared. You're not going to capture what you had. You either got to go for better or settle for less. It won't be the same. And what this guy did was come back, he was out for 22 years. Many of those years were we were in the same home group, and he got into sort of. It was one of those real sort of evangelical businessmen's religious thing, evangelical kind of a thing. And he got caught up in the rapture of that for a while, but it ran its course, And he wound up back in AA, but he was a lost man. You could just see him in a meeting. He was a lost man. And here's a guy with every resource in the world, and unlike David, he didn't get a rope. He drove a new Cadillac out in the woods and shot himself. So it's not an uncommon thing, what's written here. and it all happens all too often. Tell you one other just sort of a case photo of a way of what that looks like in life, and you've probably seen it. If you've been around very long, you've seen it. There's when people come in, like where I see it most vividly, periodically I'll take a group of people through the book, take them through doing the program out of the book. It's a long and tedious and demanding process, but it's also the most effective work I have ever done in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so periodically I'll do that. And when people get through with that, they really are charged up and ready to go, and they normally do very, very well. Now, that's one way of getting launched into good, solid recovery. The first group I ever took through that was probably 15 years ago, and about that many people, and every single one of them is still sober. So there's no magic bullet, but that comes as close to it as anything I know. And it's just getting people intensively involved in the program. And when they're intensively involved, there's little room for goofing up if you really are doing and practicing what's laid out. There's what I've noticed when I'm taking people through the steps is that if I lose them, if they're going through the steps, if I lose them, it's almost always at steps 6 and 7. It's just about where we lose them. It's nowhere else. Steve and I, the guy that's going to be on later this afternoon, he and I have got a sponsorship group that we had. Periodically we'll get together. One day we spent a half a day on steps 6 and 7. You wouldn't think that 6 brilliant alcoholics could spend that much time on something our book gives about that much space in. But critically important, with 6 and 7. And what happens with the guys and gals that I've worked with in the book, when they bomb out, it's at 6 and 7, and it's where they basically, if you look at the first 3 steps, for my money, they're about establishing a foundation for recovery. They're not really about recovery. They're about stopping the bleeding and getting hold of the lifeline, so that you got a place to start recovery. And it's a powerful thing, a very important thing. I know people who have done that and nothing more and never drank again. People stop at what they're willing to settle for. And then 4 through 7 are essentially about causes and conditions. It's about what is it that drives it? What is this thing called alcoholism? What is it that causes my mind to turn irresistibly to the thought of a drink? What is it that makes it so difficult for me to have comfortable relationships with other people? What is it about me that causes me to be restless and irritable on a fairly regular basis? That's called alcoholism. And so causes and conditions is getting down to those causes and trying to see what is it drives this canoe in such a strange pattern. And then having discovered that in the inventory, at least an introductory level, the question is posed in 6 and 7. Okay, you've seen what it is. You want to get well or don't you? I think it's just as simple as that. I think that's why Bill, or whoever wrote that portion of it, wrote so little about it. Because it's an action point. You've taken a look, you have studied the surgery, you've seen what's happened to the patient, you know why you're here. Do you want to get better or don't you? To get better, most people can read ahead. And that when you get into doing 6 and 7, the next step is action. Where you quit studying your condition and you start trying to deal with how you straighten up the wreckage of the past. And so that's where I lose them. And just one other case I want to cite, and I think it's probably an all too common case. What happens to people that I've worked with that deviate and move out, they don't just necessarily go get drunk. But what they'll do is find an easier, softer way. And an easier, softer way is instead of being in a purposeful program in a strong home group, they'll get into just visiting meetings. Just visiting meetings and talking about me and my problem and stuff like that. And that's an easier, softer way. Unfortunately, it often leads to drinking. Easier, softer way usually does. But that's what will happen. You get into that thing where it's almost a no-brainer. It's very seductive when you compare trying to right all the wrongs to just grabbing hold of the lifeboat and let's see if we can't paddle together. That's what will happen. And one night at my group, I saw a guy. Now I watch the door at my group, and what I'm looking for is fresh meat. That's what I'm after. And so if I see somebody come in, you can bet I'm going to get hold of them. Not literally, but I mean I'm going to. Anyway, I'm going to accost them. I'll put it that way. And they call it accosting. I call it welcoming, but it's just fairly aggressive welcoming. But that's what I do. And one night I saw a guy come in, and I'd known him for casually. You know how you know people just around the campus. I was aware of him, and I was also aware that he'd never had really been a show enough member. I mean, he's just one of those kind of itinerants that wandered around from one meeting to another, knew everybody in town, and I knew he wasn't a happy camper. And he came in that night, and I swear to God, he was a dead man walking. He was a dead man walking. And I went over, and I mean, even though I'm a little goofy, but I'm not totally insensitive. You know, I could recognize that the guy was not in great shape, so I didn't mess with him hard. I'm a little bit, but not much. And I just let him know he was welcome, and bought him a cup of coffee that didn't cost anything. And he responded a little bit. Not much now. I mean, he didn't jump up and clap his hands or anything like that. But he followed me everywhere I'd go. You know, I'd go sit on the front row. He never sat on the front row in his life. He'd come up there and sit right beside me, just like a little kid, and wouldn't say much. But I noticed that you could read the steps and he'd cry. You know, anything. I mean, you could burp and he'd cry. You know, anything. And the guy was an emotional wreck. And so he kept following me around every time he came to me. Couldn't get rid of him. And finally he said, will you help me a little bit? And I said, what? He said, I don't know what to do with it. I'm just coming here. I said, well, go to prison with me. He said, really? I said, yeah, go to prison with me. So we go to prison. And my God, he loved it. I think that's the first place he'd felt normal in his life was going into a prison. He was a pretty heavy roller, too. You know, he's a house on the hill type of guy. And he would take me to the prison. He wouldn't ride in my little old skateboard. He would bring a big old long Mercedes in there and slide up to my house and that thing, and I'd go out there like the potentate. You know, we'd ride out. And we out there at the prison one night, and we were talking to the guys, and an officer came in, and he came over and tapped me, and he said, Tom, you have a Mercedes? And I said, yeah, but it's at home. I said, not here. Why? He said, no, it's not that one. He said, this one's out in the parking lot, and it's sleek. I said, well, that's certainly not mine. And he said, well, the lights are on. And so I said, it's his. Okay, I'll take care of it. So I told him, I said, your lights are on in the parking lot. Go turn them off. And he said, I don't want to leave the meeting. Now, it's during the meeting. This is going on. I said, I don't care. I don't want to walk home. Go turn the lights off. And he said, I got a good battery. I said, well, you better hope it's good because it will. Well, anyway, here's a guy, that dead man walking, all at once he's coming to life, you know, and couldn't get him out of the meeting to go rescue his car. And then just over time, you just got to know him a little bit. And he's exactly what we're talking about. You know, he was one of those guys, got in the program, took a look, and decided to just survive. And if that's all he wanted to do is survive, he was doing quite enough. But he was not a poster boy just like the other guy. You know, and he was a miserable guy. And why did he cry so much? You know, it's funny when you get to know people. You get close, and you'll get some confidence, and you don't have to ask them questions. They'll start talking. And for long, he's told me he had a son that had committed suicide. And it was a troubling thing. He and his ex-wife, after a major war, had split, and he hadn't seen his children for 25 years. including the one that had killed himself. He's got another one that he sees heading the same way. I mean, he didn't have to tell me that. It was obvious that was a concern. And he had no communication, didn't know how to have any. And he said, will you help me with that? And I said, yeah, I will. I will. I said, let me give it some thought. And the fellow lived out in a western state that was quite a ways away. And so I thought it out, and I said, let me tell you what I want you to do. Now, he could afford to have bought the plane, but I said, buy a ticket to go out to that town and then back the next day. Call your son and tell him you want to meet with him for 2 hours. Don't do anything else. Don't cook anything. Don't pull the grandchildren together. Don't have a family reunion. You go out there for the purpose of amends. You make them and get back on that plane. Like to never got that fool loaded up. I swear to God, he had more excuses for not going, and finally got him on the plane. Got out there and called me. He said, I'm coming back. I could tell what that was right off the bat. And I said, why is that? He said, well, my son doesn't want to see me. I said, that's a fact. I said, how do you know? He said, well, I just know. I said, no, that's not going to work. You call that boy, 42-year-old boy. I said, you call him and tell him you want 2 hours. And if you don't do that, you can leave that state, but don't come back to North Carolina. You better keep going. Don't come back here. And so he did. He called his son, and he had the meeting, and it did just what amends do. That was a beginning for United Family. That summer, that family, that little kids, that family brought the whole tribe to vacation with him in North Carolina. How simple to deal with, eh? Just by taking the steps beyond survival and starting to get into restoration. And now this fellow's not ready for trustee yet, but he is a living, breathing member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He's a guy. He served a term as our GSR. He couldn't have spelled that before that, but he started to get into Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's the thing that's so compelling to me to understand about recovery. That not drinking is not where we stop. That's where we start. My God, we stop drinking before we get here. This is how to live at peace with it. And what I had to learn was that alcohol for me treated my alcoholism for a long time. It treated my alcoholism. It kept me from being suicidal when I was drinking, because those forces that drove me, enough booze would quieten it right down, and it'd almost go away. It would always come back, but at least it took care of the medication of what those conditions need. We call them defects of character. And my firm belief is that in recovery we will never be free until we go back and make right those wrongs. Where we have hurt people, misused them, abused them, took advantage of them, all of that. We will drag that forever, just like the case I just cited. He had deserted the family, but he drugged that with him everywhere he went. And that's the way it is in recovery. If we don't move forward and get in what they were talking about, the full program, the rest of the program, we won't know peace. We may get by. And if that's all we want, fine. But you're not my kind of alcoholic. If you're somebody that can settle for just not drinking, I'm not that simple. I've got a complicated mind, and I can't live with that kind of stuff. And so that's what the rest of the program is. Those first few steps are about getting acquainted with it, getting it under control, and then from 7 on, it's about making those things right that eat our lunch on a regular basis. Those things that we can't quite forget. Wish we could, but we can't forget. And recovery is being able to straighten that stuff out. I had the pleasure of hearing our founder, Bill, one time way back in '65. we were in a small meeting, and he was really talking about traditions, but he was also talking about this. And he said, the thing that just stuck with me so much, he said, if I take the actions that are laid out in the program, like the men's process and that kind of thing, he says, there will come a day when you'll be able to walk the face of the earth and meet any human being any human being on earth and look them in the eye. My God, I was barely up to knees. And I hear that. That sounded like an impossible dream, to be able to do that. To not be dodging anybody. To not have to be uneasy about being around anybody. And, the guy told the truth. The guy told the truth. Today, I don't know of a human being anywhere on earth that I couldn't comfortably meet. I'm not going to like every human I meet, and they're not going to like me. I thought you were bringing me something, and you're just sitting down and eating it. I thought you were bringing me. But, I said, my God, an angel is coming up. Reality sets in. Yeah. But that tremendous thing is so vital to me. And so that thing of getting that wreckage out, that stuff that drives the engine, that causes us to beat our brains out against the wall over and over and over, and that's what people miss when they opt out and just start for survival. And there's no regulators on that. There's nobody that's going to tell you that you're doing that, but that's just something we have to gauge for ourselves. And we're either going to go for the whole deal and be free, or we can survive, and it's our choice, totally, 100%. I've got many good friends who have never really done steps. I mean, they've played with them and talked about them in meetings, but in terms of taking action, never done it. I know old timers who 35, 40 years sober who've never made an amend in their lives. They're not like me. I'm not somebody who can live with that kind of junk. I want to be free. I want to be free, and I am. I am as free as I've got sense enough to be. And I got some amends left that I'd like to do that I haven't been able to do yet, because the other person has got to be willing to accept it. You can't find your peace at somebody else's expense, so can't force it. But anyway, what our book says is to do it wherever it's possible to do it. Vitally, vitally important thing. And that's where that whole business, just like this guy, he got by in and out of AA for a few years, but he had 20 years of sobriety, and he winds up hanging himself. Wonder why? But when you think about that, and you think about what you carry around with those driving energies and emotions, you think about it. One day that makes eminent sense. That's all that made sense to David, was to put that rope on, jump. And that it unfortunately is not an unusual event. That it happens a lot of times as people start trying to find a new life, and that sort of chasm in between is where we lose a lot of people, like some that I've described here. And so I think that's such a vital part of the program. And just to get to the point of being able to be comfortably sober. And then the rest of it that he didn't talk about too much in there is, by the way, I always offer the invitation to ask questions or comment anytime, but now I don't ever give time for it. I mean, you got to just stop me, because I get going. I'm not going to stop tease you and say, what about? No, if you got something you just want to comment about or say, what do you mean by that? Feel free. And all we'd ask you to do is go to that mic there, so that Mike can capture the mic and get it on recording, not have answers to no questions. So far so good. Deadly illness. If I stop drinking, that will stop the hangovers, but it may not introduce real peace in the valley. And then into that process where we start to get rid of the stuff we drag around, and we become free. And where does the joy come from? For my money, and again, if you're real new now, you may not know this, but just keep an eye out for it. You'll come to a place in the book and it's right after this amends process I've just been beating on here. Right after that amends process, there's a little line that says in the book that says, if we are painstaking about this process, and it's talking about the process of amends. Painstaking means nitpicking. That means that you're getting back and getting it all. Painstaking. You're being thoughtful. You're being insightful. You're being honest about where you owe amends. That's what painstaking means to me. If you're painstaking about that, you'll be amazed before you're halfway through. And I can testify that is absolutely true. Absolutely. It was true for me. When I started to make amends, I immediately started to feel better. And then that little line is introducing, it says, if we are painstaking, we'll be amazed. And then it lists 10 promises? 10? Yeah, 10. 10 promises of what will happen. And I'm not going to read those things, but you can take a look at them and read. They're impossible dreams, it sounds like. But they'll be, before we even halfway through with amends, those things will start to happen. And it's just states of mind that just seem totally unrealistic when they're big. But I'm here to tell you that every promise will come true absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't have to do any magic tricks. All I've got to do is take the actions to clear up the wreckage of the past, and that in itself will give that kind of relief. And then the other thing that I'm a great believer in is after you get through with the promises, if you look carefully, you may see the same thing I do, you may not. But what I see when you get through with promises is that working on me is done. It's done. Everything from promises on starts with me, but never ends with me. Everything from promises on starts with me and ends with others. Take 10-step, for example. I can't recite much out of it, but it's one of the shortest little chapters in the book talking about step 10. And it basically talking about, well, so what happens after all these wonderful things happen? And it says in so many words that we have now entered the world of the Spirit. We've got a spiritual life, no longer a theory. It's become a way of life. So we've entered the world of the Spirit. Our task now that we're in the world of the Spirit, we're not dragging dead stuff behind us. Our task now is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. Powerful words for me. And understanding. What does it mean? I don't think that means insight and self-knowledge. I don't think that's what that means. I think it's we're in the world of the Spirit. What's our real purpose? To be of maximum service to God and those around us, Not about studying me forever. It's about getting out of that and starting to have useful purpose. And so what I think it means is like that man who walked in, dead man walking in my group. Now, I wasn't thinking, I think I will improve myself in understanding effectiveness. That's not what I thought. I thought, here's a guy in a crisis. I just went over there to do what came natural. Try to get him out of that death march and get him hopping along this road. But that's exactly what it was. I mentioned in the beginning that I was dismayed a good bit, still am, about the number of people who come into Alcoholics Anonymous and miss it. And I mean just flat miss it. They just travel through as if it's a tour. And I want to understand that. I want to understand what it is that causes somebody to come in here with a life that's shot, take a look, and walk out. What are we doing? What kind of a job? I want to understand that. I want to understand that behavior the best I can. And then I want to see if we can do something better. That's how I started doing big book workshops with people, where I started taking people through the book. I heard somebody describe that one time, and I'd done it. I mean, I've taken people through the steps ever since I've been here. Everything from Marine Corps style, do it or die, and from 12, 14 weeks of crash course. I've done it every way known to man. But I heard some description about, ways to use that book and how to draw it out. And so I said, shoot, I'm going to try that. And so I did. I got I'm going to have to hurry, but I had I decided to do. I'd never seen one. I thought, well, my God, I'm not the village idiot. I can figure that out. You just read the book and then try to make it work. And so I told the guys that I sponsored, I said, we don't do this thing. If you want to get in it, come on, and you bring anybody you want to. Well, that's an open door policy. And I regretted that the first night we met. There was I didn't have a clue who was coming. There was one gal that came in. She's a dear friend of mine today, but when she came in, I really didn't like that woman. I did not like her, and she disliked me more. And she was a brilliant woman, Ivy League educated gal, a highly intelligent woman, stone atheist, and probably still is. In a kind of a way. She's probably more agnostic than anything else. But anyway, she was stone atheist and proud of it and just loved to debate, me particularly. And she came in and I said, oh, my God, I'm going to be in the debating society for the next year. And so she comes in. And it's funny now, I bet you all did it here this morning. You two look like Mormon missionaries. I just got back from Utah. And every young guy I saw in Salt Lake was dressed like that, tied a white shirt. I thought I was having a flashback. But anyway, she came and so we got going. I tried to ignore. It's funny about how people will group. The missionaries sit together. And so she sat down with two other aggravated cases that I knew very well. And I said, well, okay, we're off and running. So we got to work. And it's an amazing thing how the process works. You have to be sincere. It doesn't matter whether you're sincere or not. If you'll take the actions, it'll happen. I don't care what your motives are. It'll happen. And so we got going along, and I noticed, now this is a painstaking process. You read every word, and the operative term is always, do you identify or relate? Identify means you did it. Relate means you would have if you'd have thought about it. And so that's the only term. What do you think never hits the table? Don't care what you think. What you want to do is what you identify. What you want to do is make that big book become your story of recovery. So we're going through that, and I'm noticing a little warmth over in that idiot row. And we got to the third step prayer. And now we didn't just happen to get there. I'm somebody who I love spontaneity, provided it's well planned. And so we just spontaneously landed on the third step prayer at the end of the meeting. And I said, we're going to close different tonight. We're not going to do to our Father. We're going to do the third step prayer. And I'm going to give you three options. One is to join hands and get out and do it with us. Second is to hold our hands while we do it. Third, you can step back and watch us do it. She told me later, graphically, she told me later what she said to herself when I said that. And it was not nice, what she was saying about me. And it was really untrue. I'm not that bad. But it's a dilemma for her, the moment of truth. And rather than boogieing, she stepped into the circle. No burning bush, but a changed person. From that point on, she just mellowed. If anybody had told me this would happen, I'd have sworn they were drinking. She became my backup. If I had to be gone, she would lead the group. If anybody told me that would happen, I'd have probably resigned from AA. No, I wouldn't have done that, but I'd have been tempted, though. But it did. That thing really worked. And today, I just got a note from her right before I left to come up here, that she is probably the warmest, most gracious person in that region of the state. If I have anything to do with a female alcoholic, that's my go-to person. Tremendous thing. And to me, that's what's so important about this thing of effectiveness. That it's not enough to sit back and moan and groan about the problem. It's not enough to talk about how treatment centers get people confused and they don't know how to come to AA. That's no solution to anything. That's no contribution. That's just griping is all that is. And so understanding effectiveness is if there's something wrong, I've conditioned myself to the point that if I think of a problem, I don't have to prepare to think of a solution. I automatically start thinking of a solution. I waste no time on agonizing over problems. I don't want to understand problems. I want to get rid of them. If I have to understand them enough to get rid of them, I'll spend a little bit of time. But I think that's what it is. I want to make a contribution. So I want to understand the problems and try to do something about it if I can. And then it just goes on to say, that what we're doing now, we're moving into actively working with others rather than ourselves. That's why it's so important to me about that from 9 on. It never ends with me. It always ends with others, every bit of it. And it says, a little further on down there, it says that we're going to goof. We're human beings. There are going to be times we'll goof. We'll be rude to somebody, or unkind to somebody, or mistreat somebody. But we don't need to go into Freudian psychiatry to deal with that. It's just we're restored to human. We don't transcend human condition. We're restored to being human beings. That's all. Normal, average human beings. And we're going to goof. But it's not a big deal if it's a goof and I just did something, John, say, hey, John, I'm sorry about that, buddy. I'll try not to do that again. That's it. That's the end of it. You don't need to do an inventory on that and analyze every nuance of feelings. Baloney. I just goof, man. I'm sorry. And move on. Not live in it. And I think the spirit of it follows right behind that. You'll see this now. I know there's some new folk here, but you'll see this when you get to it. So you be warned now. This will get you going. It says right below that when we goof, we take care of it right now, and then we immediately turn our attention to somebody we can help. We don't dwell on it and agonize over it. Why did I do that? Who cares? Move on. Get on with the business of living. And that's the whole spirit of some people think Step 10 is about just studying your behavior every day. I did a workshop, not this last time, but another time I was in Utah, did a workshop with a bunch of guys. I keep looking because me and the clock are not always agreeing. Did a workshop with some guys, and at one point I was talking about inventory. And I pointed out, I was probably 50 years at that time when I was doing that workshop. And I pointed out that in 50 years I had done 3 complete inventories. And that I thought that was just about what was right. And I'm talking about doing full thing and doing 5th step and that. That I'd done 3. And started on with the next area. And a guy, nice young yuppie salesman type of guy was sitting over there. And he said, can I ask you something? I said, yeah. He said, did you say you'd only done 3 inventories in 50 years? I said, yeah. And I said, why do you ask? And he said, my God, I've only been, I'm 17 or 18 years. He said, I know I've done over 200. And he said, as a matter of fact, I do one every day. I mean, I log everything I do during the day, and then I come in at night and I evaluate that. I looked at him. I said, "You got any hobbies?" I mean, come on, for God's sakes! What are you going to do to start? How am I doing now? Malarkey. That's not what it's about. It's about check yourself. If you're out of whack, fix it. Then get on with the business of living. And all that whole spirit of that thing. And then it goes on, to some more stuff in there. But the whole tenor of the game and everything in 10, 11, and 12, from my read, is that it's all about how to practice what it says, to be of maximum service to God and those around us. It's what it's about. You don't deal with a self-centered condition by focusing on self. That's not the way you do that. Now, that's the way you drive yourself nuts, is by that. The more people work on problems, my observation has been the worse the problems get. They don't get fixed. What they do is get romanced and they'll grow. I guarantee you they'll grow. And so that whole business about the difference between me and David, and many of you and David, and my buddy that did the memorial for it, the difference is doing the whole program. It's not about just stopping the bleeding and trying to survive at that level. It's about finding new life. It's finding new purpose, finding things that make you feel good about yourself, glad that you came to the dance, you know. And so that's what it's about. And to me, this whole business of getting down to the real illness, it's what the steps are designed to do. The inventory will help us understand those things that we're out of whack on, and then these amends things will help us get that back. As we make amends, we don't have to understand all that behavior. All we have to do is take the actions to do the amends, and we will take care of that defect. I read something one time, somebody wrote it, Stevenson maybe wrote it. He said, do the thing you fear to do, and the death of fear is certain. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And that's the way it is in the program. We've got about 2 minutes. If anybody wants to ask a quick question, comment, editorial, protest movement.